the other aspect is we do have some ways to detect when carriers are fraudulently tracking. So that's something that we've seen become more and more prevalent over the past year and a half. So some of the carriers, some of the more sophisticated fraudsters do try to, show fake locations. So that's something that we detect. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there right now. So,
Welcome to the ThinkFreight Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Werdine, and it's my pleasure to have Annalise Sandhu. She's the co-founder at Chaine, an AI-powered freight booking and visibility platform. Annalise, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of dive right into kind of who you are and kind of what your background is. I think what you guys at Chaine are doing is extremely interesting. So I want to kind of see who you are and kind of how you got into the industry and how you decided to, pursue entrepreneurship within the industry.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll give you kind of a background as for what I used to do and a little intro to Chaine. So my company is Chaine, and we unify carrier procurement, tracking, and automations into a single and easy to use platform. In terms of my background, so my background is a bit unconventional. So I actually dropped out of medical school to start a logistics startup.
Wow.
It's pretty interesting backstory. So my journey actually started several years back. So my background is in the sciences, and I was actually doing clinical research at UCSF when I met Param, who is my husband, and he's also my co-founder. So at the time, Param was running his own trucking company, and it was the summer before I went to medical school, and I was actually helping him dispatch. So I got a little taste of the logistics world, and even kind of going into medical school, I was still helping him dispatch. So I would be up super early in the morning before anatomy lab, calling drivers. It was pretty crazy. But I was just constantly amazed at how manual the industry was, especially coming from outside of the industry and being exposed. I was just it's a ton of manual work involved. We were just spending all day, sending emails, making phone calls. And, the nature of logistics is inherently collaborative, but collaboration is almost impossible because the systems are disconnected, and people just have to resort to, picking up the phone and sending an email. About a year into medical school, I was starting to realize this wasn't the path that I really wanted to take. I actually went to medical school because it was one of those things that you do to be successful. It's oh, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer. And everybody kind of just goes down this path. So that was the path that I was on. But, I was starting to kind of struggle with depression when I was there. And I was I wanted to take a year off and see, kind of explore other options before really committing fully down that path. In the meantime, Param had actually transitioned from having a trucking company to starting a startup. And he had a visibility startup at the time. And so during my year off, then I started, exploring the technology side of things. So that's when I really got exposed to, building product, talking to users, doing design, and UI design and all of that. And I became really passionate about, the product side and getting product into the hand of users. So that was when I really made the decision, to transition from medical school. And I ended up dropping out to pursue a startup. We did notice that the visibility space was extremely crowded. So one of the learnings from that startup was that a dot on the map doesn't tell the full picture, and it's not going to give the result that we had thought that it might give, when starting that. So we wanted to make something that was more collaborative, that really solved users' problems. And at the time, the concept of digital freight brokers were emerging. They started to become a hot topic. And our thought process was why should they be the ones with all the technology? How do we bring the technology from digital freight brokers into the hands of the rest of the industry? And that was really kind of the thought process behind Chaine, is simplifying the freight brokerage process from the time a load gets booked all the way to delivery. And that's kind of where it got started. So
That's really fascinating. So I want to dive in first. So did you have a path, like when you're in medical school, like like were you just wanting to be a general practitioner doctor? Like did you have a specialty that you were like wanting to pursue, or were you just like just wanting to go to medical school and wanting to become a doctor?
So I was really interested in research.
Okay.
So I was doing clinical research before I was actually studying the effects of like electronic cigarettes and regular cigarettes. And I like doing clinical trials. So I think my goal was to become a physician scientist. And like there, and the reason why is because you get to experiment, like you get to tinker with things. And like that's where I saw like the corollary, later on with tinkering with things on the technology side. But yeah, that was my goal, was to do some type of research.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And then so you took a year off and then started to help Param, your husband, with the visibility startup.
Yeah.
What was, I guess how, like, what was, I guess, maybe your family's perception of that, right? Like, I know when I got into logistics for the first time, I had left a pretty solid career in automotive, and my family was not very thrilled. They being a 24, 25-year-old, were still very much like integral in my decisions and things like that. And this was one of the first ones I'd really made on my own. And they were very like hesitant to, like, they had never really heard of what I was going to be doing as a freight broker, and they were very hesitant when I said that I was leaving. What was maybe the idea, or how did your family maybe take some of that, that news that you were going to take a year off and potentially not even pursue medical school anymore?
Yeah, I think I got lucky just in terms of my family, just kind of supporting me in whatever I do. So I think that they didn't really see it as too much of an issue. I think it was more a matter of like showing them, like what I'm passionate about. And like, it came down to being like a lot more passionate about like pursuing technology and building things versus going into medicine. They were surprised though. So it was kind of like a interesting conversation, but they saw it coming because throughout that year, it just like wasn't working at all. So yeah.
No, that's, I won't lie. Like this is the first time you and I have met, for anyone who's watching. So when you told me that, like, you were originally in medical school and wanted to become a doctor, I was very shocked that like you dropped out to to start a logistics company and to do this. Cause it's like, they're so different. Right. But like what you said, like you were interested in more the research side, and there is a lot of connections to what you're doing now and how you guys have built Chaine to that research side of medical school. So I think that's really fascinating that kind of you took kind of that passion for research, but just kind of took it into a whole nother direction for freight and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people are like, how do you go from medical school to like, logistics and starting a startup? But there definitely is like a lot of similarities between doing clinical research and like figuring out like what works, what doesn't work, evaluating like what you're doing and seeing if it's effective. There's a lot of corollaries to building products. So obviously there is a lot of other things that I had to learn after making the transition, but it wasn't any more difficult than having to learn what I was on the path to learn in medical school anyways. So
yeah, very true. Let me ask you, what was maybe one of the hardest things from that transition from, being a medical med student to kind of being an entrepreneur and starting your own business, or even just like helping Param with what he was doing with that startup?
Yeah, I think I guess one of the things that was difficult is like coming from a super like research focused and like intense academic background. There is like, you have to kind of unlearn some things. Like you can't study your way into having a successful startup. Like you cannot perfect things and think that you're going to be able to quickly build things and get it into the hands of users. So I think there is an aspect of like learning to like let go and like say like, okay, let me get something that's like, let me get the, I guess like the minimally viable thing into the hands of users, seeing if it works. And then kind of iterating from there. And then there's a lot of aspects of the business that you have to learn as well. But it's just that the nature of running a company is kind of having to learn about a ton of different things. But overall, it was an interesting transition. So
No, for sure. Did you ever like know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur or that you wanted to do your own thing, or was kind of that time with Param and building and helping his trucking company and then the visibility startup, was that kind of the taste that you wanted or needed that like just kind of jump started it all?
I would say it was always something that I was interested in. I even thought that like after going into research, it's some people do go into like, you can go into the biotech side of things in terms of a startup.
Yeah.
I knew it would be something that I would explore like much later, of course, because you have to first go down the entire path and learn all the sciences, and then do residency and then explore that. But it was definitely something that I was interested in, but I got it a lot sooner than I had originally planned. So
No, that's awesome. So let me ask you this. So I want to kind of dive more into Chaine because I think it's really fascinating. So like you guys had kind of, like you said, you kind of saw the rise of digital freight brokers and kind of were wondering why should they have all the technology. And you guys really, like you said, like you kind of took, bringing technology kind of into the hands of the smaller end user, right? And I think that's really, really pertinent in logistics because there are so many big companies that have so much technology that is needed. And there is such a limitation on smaller carriers who just can't afford to spend for some of this technology. So what you guys have done, I think, is fascinating. How did, I guess, what was kind of like that story behind like how you guys found Chaine from that visibility startup into what it is today?
yeah, so when we were doing the visibility, I think one of the things that we learned was regardless of like, let's just assume that you had full like real time tracking visibility all the
Right.
time, and that isn't the case. Even you can have like the best process, and you're still not going to have 100% visibility.
Right.
But one of the things that we noticed was that like the users were still spending like all day making phone calls and sending emails. So we really dived into the process, and like we sat behind users, we watched what they were doing, and we realized that like it doesn't cover the full picture. Like there's still things that are happening while like a load is in transit. Like maybe you have to confirm case count, or you have to remind the driver, about certain equipment that they need. So there's still a lot of things that are happening, or even confirming like check-in times, checkout times
Yep.
that can't necessarily be handled 100% from the visibility side. So that's when we started saying like, okay, how can we take this further? So like our goal was to really evaluate like over the life cycle of a load, what are the different activities that are happening, and what can we do at the different points, whether it's like pre-booking, or whether it's like after a load is delivered. What are the different things that we can do throughout the life cycle to make the user more efficient, essentially? And that's where we kind of transition Chaine into being more of like a collaborative product that solves these different pain points across the entire workflow.
Where did the name come from? I'm always fascinated by how companies name themselves. Where did you guys come up with that name?
Yeah, so it's based on chain, like without the e. So it's
Right.
like the thought process is like supply chain, and really like visibility, or not visibility, but like the supply chain being like just like essentially a link throughout, like through different companies throughout the entire like flow of products like moving throughout the world. So that was the reasoning behind the name. Of course, Chaine without the e is not available at all, so we
Right.
had to put the e on the end.
No, that's awesome. And it sounds like you guys really like thought through what you wanted to do from like taking visibility and saying, okay, like how can we take this further? How can we really make everything efficient for everyone who wants to use this? And I want to say like, you guys, it looks like you guys have integrated a lot of cool like AI powered tools now into things. So I want to kind of dive into that. Like, so in a minute. So like who is Chaine for? Like if people who are listening, whether they're brokers, carriers, shippers, who can use this and like what's the process like if people wanted to get started on something like this?
Yeah, so our customer today is the freight broker. So our tool is made for operational users, specifically the carrier reps are the ones that are typically the users of the product. Um, just we do have carriers on platform as well, of course, interacting with our customers. So there's a lot of like collaboration that can happen. We make it easier for them to talk to one another when the load is in transit. So we're doing a lot of those things so that the carriers are on our platform. They're not our customer. They're not our customer though.
No, that's awesome. And so if broker or if carriers want to, I guess what is the process like for both carriers and brokers if they're looking to utilize the platform to help make things more efficient on their end?
Yeah. So in terms of the freight brokers, so we have like a sales process. So any freight broker that wants to sign up, they could just reach out to our sales team on our website, and that's how you can kind of get up and running. The carriers, you guys will probably see it out there in the wild, Chaine. You like in terms of getting like messages when you're assigned to loads, and then also during the booking process as well. So today we make it easier for like freight brokers to interact with their network of carriers. So it's not something that you can necessarily like sign up for at this point as a carrier and just be able to like find freight brokers.
Got it. So if a broker is using Chaine, they can effectively use this to help you like better utilize their capacity, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. So it sounds like now you guys have a couple of different tools, which I want to dive into as well. One is being Copilot. What is Copilot? It sounds like that's kind of something that's maybe that interacts with AI in a way. What are you guys doing with Copilot, and how does that process work, or what does that tool do to help brokers?
So what Copilot does is it essentially will follow the freight broker's current SOPs. So each organization will have different things that they need to do. It can also be customer specific, like certain customers have certain requirements. So the goal is to make these manual tasks throughout the load lifecycle a lot easier. So what the Copilot will do is when it can be configured for certain load milestones. So for example, you can have one that focuses on POD collection. So when the load gets delivered, it'll reach out to the driver or the dispatcher to collect the proof of delivery. The other aspect would be like maybe confirming ETAs when the load is in transit. We can also detect when the load is going to be late and send an alert to the user so that they know. The other aspect is detecting exceptions. So like let's say that the driver or dispatcher reports that there's been a car accident or they have a flat tire. All of those things, we will take that information and alert the user.
Got it. And that's just all done like kind of like basically on Copilot or on autopilot, essentially.
Yeah. Yep.
No, that's awesome, and that makes it a little bit easier to not have to worry about some of the things that are happening in each individual load, especially if you know as things are happening or as you're setting us up, that how you need to set things up for each customer. So it seems like it makes things really more efficient for the broker to be able to utilize their tools that they have now, and also be able to more effectively service their customers, right? If they can send these automated or have an automated workflow to say, hey, these are delivered, and then they can very easily send things to their customers, say, hey, all this is completed, here's everything you need. It makes things a lot easier for everyone, right? Because then you're not having to send or make 15 different phone calls, and when someone doesn't answer, follow it up with an email and spend 2 hours just trying to get a load update. So I think that's a very unique process you guys are doing, and I think it definitely helps on the broker's end and the carrier's end too, because they don't have to spend as much time on the phones.
Yeah. Our goal is to really how do you supercharge these reps to be able to do more? So we're not trying to completely take over any task, but there's these manual tasks that are always done at the same time. So we do those tasks, and then let's say that we still aren't getting a response, or we don't have the appropriate status update. Then in those cases, then we alert the rep okay, now you need to step in. We've done what we could do on our end. So it's really a tool to make them more efficient. How do we take a company that has 30 reps, and how do we make them operate as if they had 100 reps or more. So that's kind of the goal is to bring that level of efficiency.
Now, with your capacity tool, how does that help, expand or if I was a broker still, how would that help my carrier network or help me expand my internal network that I'm currently utilizing?
So right now we have it based on a customer's like current network. We do make it easier for them to like re-engage with carriers. Like let's say, so we store like past lane history, so we know like all of the lanes that a carrier has run. So we make it easy to like re-engage those carriers automatically. So we'll send out, essentially send out like, through email and phone call, will allow them to bid on loads. So in that term, like we make it easier for them to maybe re-engage carriers that haven't been used recently. I wouldn't say it's like a tool right now to be able to get new capacity.
No, I think that's awesome because it helps eliminate some of the one and done carriers that you have in kind of your network that you find on a load board. And you may say, hey, like if you're running certain lanes or if you use them a couple of times and you can re-engage them, hey, I haven't run anything in a Kentucky lane in a while, but you remember or Chaine remembers, hey, there's these carriers that have run a similar lane before. You can very easily re-engage those carriers to be able to reutilize your current capacity instead of trying to find new capacity, whether that's cold calling, load boards, or anything like that, right?
Yeah, because what we've seen recently is like there's a trend now of people that are really going back to like what the traditional definition of a carrier rep is. Like traditionally, carrier reps would have relationships with carriers. They would spend the time to like talk to carriers and like you even know like what your carriers like to do, like how many kids do they have. So like really building that relational aspect that makes it a lot easier as a freight brokerage and not having to deal with like the load boards and a lot of the scam and fraud that's happening. So we've seen a shift kind of trying to first rely on your current network that like how they are and the lanes that they're doing, how their performance is, rather than just going straight to the load board. So that's our goal there, is to help re-engage those carriers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. With the massive push right now on securing supply chains, securing freight, utilizing carriers that you've used in the past, that you've already vetted, you already have a trustworthy relationship with, is always going to be far more cost effective and also safer for your network. You're going to have a lot less likely chance of being double brokered or having a load stolen in transit if you're utilizing the same capacity over and over again. So I think that how Chaine is helping, reutilize your current capacity is really, it's a good feature to have within, what you guys are doing. It keeps, keeps people from having to switch and use 10 or 12 different tools all at the same time. They can just utilize, one or two or three, because there really is platform and app fatigue. So, keeping everything is close or as much in one window as possible, I think is fantastic.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we noticed is like there's a lot of like point solutions in the market. So there's like tools to help you with tracking, and then there's tools to help you with booking, and there's just a ton of different apps, and then there's rating tools, and all of these screens are just taking up space, and it becomes very hectic for the user, especially when they're trying to follow process. It becomes really difficult if you have so many things on your mind. You're constantly context switching. So we try to bring all those into one as much as possible.
That's awesome. And let me ask you, so there are a lot of, I guess, visibility and I guess load matching or I don't want to say capacity tools, because you guys are kind of like a capacity tool that reutilizes your current capacity, but like how do you guys, I guess, not help, but how do you guys, I guess, stand out from some of the other visibility tools that are out there that have been around for, some being around for a long time, and some of the new ones that are just kind of popping up, whether that's, over the last 5 or 10 years or just, the last year or so?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of different aspects to that. One aspect is like it's extremely user friendly. It's collaborative, where like you can chat with the driver, chat with the dispatcher very easily. So all that's really brought into all that context that's today living like out of emails, text messages, GChat. all of that's brought into a single place. The other aspect is we do have some ways to detect when carriers are fraudulently tracking. So that's something that we've seen become more and more prevalent over the past like year and a half. So some of some of the more sophisticated fraudsters do try to, show fake locations. So that's something that we detect. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there right now. So
how are ways that they have been able to like find ways to spoof their location? Are they doing it through, I guess, things I would maybe VPNs, or how do you guys know how they're doing stuff like that? And how is Chaine, I guess, detecting some of those things?
Yeah, there's a few different ways that people are doing it. And I think one way is like one of the more like sophisticated ways is you can actually run an Android on a computer. So not everybody knows how to do that. It does take some technical skill, but it's possible because for app development, that's how like you build apps is like the developer will run the app essentially on a computer. So that's one way that we've seen that. And that way you could really be sitting anywhere in the world and just have any app open. It's not specific to our app, but you could have any app open and kind of like emulate some of the underlying behavior of the device. So that's one of the ways that we've seen.
Wow. Yeah, it's definitely becoming a very sophisticated world that we're living in to try to avoid some of these fraudulent activities and fraudulent behaviors that we're seeing from double brokers, from straight thieves, from pilferage thieves. I mean, it's getting kind of insane that, you can now need or request tracking, get tracking, it shows everything's fine, and it be completely wrong. And that definitely I think is a good way that Chaine can help set themselves apart, because you guys, if you guys can help detect those fraudulent or spoofing locations, it definitely helps the end user. It helps the shippers. It kind of helps everyone understand, hey, like we have to be more on top of some of these newer ways that carriers are getting played with, or brokers are being played with, or our supply chains are being messed with.
Yeah. We try to stay ahead of the curve as much as possible, because anytime you solve one problem, then they're always like one step ahead. They're continually evolving as well. So
yeah, that's what we're seeing. I mean, there's so much, so much money in fraud, and so much money with freight that's just sitting around with very minimal protection. I think that these bigger organizations have found ways to really infiltrate and be able to take more control over what's happening, and we definitely have to, as a whole supply chain, figure out ways to more detect these fraudulent activities, and like you guys are definitely staying ahead of that. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's something we try to keep the focus on. So
now I want to say, on the visibility end, you guys are still helping on that side too. So what do you guys do on the visibility side, and maybe on the integration side as well, that can kind of help integrate Chaine with some of the existing tools that, brokers are running on a day-to-day?
Yeah, on the visibility side, so we do visibility through like a ton of different methods. We have like the basic methods like mobile app tracking. Of course, we have a bunch of different ELD providers as well. So carriers can connect through their ELDs. I think some of the other things that we do that are pretty cool is some of the larger carriers that don't want to share like their ELD. They can also integrate with us through whatever method that they have the capability for. So some of the things that we've seen are sending updates to API. We've seen EDI. We have FTP as well. So there's a ton of different methods that we enable for the carrier to be able to get connected and share information, kind of regardless of their method of choice.
I think that's great that you guys do offer so many different options. How has the, I guess, ELD integration been? I know that I see a lot of carriers pushing back on wanting to integrate ELDs, and how's that been for you guys?
So we try to have language around like when the carrier is enabling their ELD, we give like the carrier they're able to like just go on Chaine essentially like click a button and get their ELD set up. So we have language around like how the ELD is being used. So we try to make it like, I would say like educate the carriers on how the data is actually being used. It's only shared for like that specific load. They have to like give permission essentially when they're enabling it. So, but of course there's always some pushback. So that's why we have, that's why to us, like we are kind of agnostic of the method of tracking. We just try to get the visibility one way or another.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of carriers have that notion, or a lot of, people in general have that notion, especially with the world we live in today, with our phones constantly tracking us and apps trying to track us constantly, that, hey, maybe we are under surveillance, or maybe our ELDs are being tracked in a bigger method, if we are attaching them to some of these platforms. So I definitely can understand kind of the pushback, but also kind of the need to find these different integration tools, because there are plenty of, bigger carriers or mid-sized carriers that do want to have these kind of ELD integrations, because it is just a lot easier for them overall. They don't have to have their drivers, accept tracking on their phones. They don't have to worry about any of those. It's just constant. Whenever they accept a load, it starts tracking right away, and then they don't have to worry about sending those updates. Their drivers don't have to do anything. It just kind of makes the process a little bit smoother.
Yeah, it's a better user experience, like for everyone involved, to go for that method. So we definitely push for that where we can, and then you can always fill in the gaps with the mobile app visibility.
But before we wrap, I want to ask you, I really appreciate you taking the time today to come talk a little bit about Chaine and kind of your very unique background and how you got into the industry. But I want to ask you, because we are in some interesting times with, we just saw a new report that, trucking costs have risen to the highest point they have pretty much ever. They rose about just around 7%. We're seeing load rates and rejections start to rise a little bit. What are you most bullish on for the rest of 2024 for the freight industry?
And are you talking about in terms of like the product side, or?
Anything you're bullish on, whether that's product side, rate side, stability side, whatever you're most bullish on for the rest of 24.
Yeah. I think just a big concern just in the industry right now, like that's kind of put everybody on alert. A lot of people are just really focused on the fraud side. It's like, how do we, it's just like, we talk to our customers all the time, and like, they're just constantly, facing issues, and like they're trying to stay ahead of like these fake emails and people changing it by one character. So I think that's like where now like people's attention has really shifted to like the fraud side. So that's where also like we're focused on in terms of like the booking side and the visibility side. I think a lot of companies have been like really coming together at this time and saying like, okay, how can we as an industry like really like get ahead of these fraudsters? So I'm hoping that like the FMCSA kind of puts their foot down on a lot of these like pin switching activities. But in the meantime, I think one of the things that we're focused on is like throughout the entire process, making sure that one, you're working with like your network of vetted carriers, and then two, when you're engaging with new carriers, making sure that those carriers are who they say they are, that they're legitimate, kind of knowing their digital footprint when they're interacting. So that's a big focus on for us for 2024.
I love that. I think that, staying in that loop and making sure that, everyone is staying high, very high alert on fraud, because it is the biggest issue that plagues our industry right now. And hopefully the FMCSA and hopefully Congress can create some new kind of division maybe within the FMCSA that is more an active arm instead of just a regulatory division. So I think that hopefully, like you said, hopefully we can have some more collaboration and more a word on these things, and a lot more development on actually helping and getting rid of some of these spoofing and pin switching. And there's just so many different aspects to fraud, and so many different holes that are plaguing the industry that we just have to kind of solve and fix, and just kind of keep everyone on high alert,
Yeah, for sure. I think the more the industry is educated, and the more we can stay ahead of it, then it'll get reduced over time. But right now it's a big deal. So
absolutely. Yeah. Over time, it'll definitely come down, but a couple years ago, 5 years ago, it was pretty much, we didn't hear much about the actual fraud or theft. It was more double brokers who were just skimming off the top and actually paying carriers. And it really just evolved into straight up theft, pilferage, identity theft. It morphed into something pretty ugly, and now we've just got to really get it under control. Annalise, I really appreciate your time today. I really appreciate you coming on the show, talking about kind of your background, about Chaine, what you guys are doing. If our audience wants to get involved, or they want to kind of learn more about what you guys are doing, or sign up for Chaine, how can they find you guys?
Yeah, so our website is chaineapp.com. You guys can also, we have a talk to sales button there. You can also reach out to me directly, or really any of the team at Chaine, and we'll be happy to kind of help you guys out and see if we can solve any of your problems. So
awesome. And we'll have all the links to Chaine and to Annalise in our show notes. If you guys like today's podcast, make sure you give it a like and review. It helps us out a ton. Don't forget, we do drop newsletters 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, thinkfreight.io. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode. And don't forget to think freight.